Well, this is a first for me. Doing a reaction video to something that someone recently posted. Eh, well, hey. Well, more like commentary, I suppose, I should say. Anyways, these guys were discussing how to make Thundarr the Barbarian TTRPG. So, let's see what they had to say.
Well, Thundarr the Barbarian is a post apocalyptic setting set in a future Earth about 2,000 years where pretty much civilization has been mostly destroyed. As the show itself says, the world is now a place of savagery, super science, and sorcery. You have barbarism, you have magic, and you also have all kinds of all the staples of science fiction: genetic manipulation, robots, cybernetics, you name it, it's there.
And it stars three main characters: Thundarr the Barbarian, Princess Ariel, who is the magician of the group, and her powers
Mhm,
are. I'll let you talk about her powers in a bit when we go into
mhm.
the.
Okay, my explanation of Ariel's powers is that Ariel is a magic user who has a diverse set of skills, and by TTRPG standards, Ariel would actually be a high level magic user, which would explain why she knows so many things, and why some of her most frequently used abilities are actually rather large scale. Actually, you know what? Let's go take a look. Oh, yeah, that's right. Technically, I did. Oh, here you are. Let's see here. Oh, the barrier one. That, seriously, that is one of Ariel's spells. That is several miles long. Like I said, Ariel is a powerful magic user. She is not some noob novice. Oh, if you want to see a novice, there's Merlick. Yeah, this guy. Um, being a noob who gets his butt handed to him by people who aren't wizards is an important part of the episode where they introduce Merlick. Den of the Sleeping Demon is a particularly unusual episode because of the fact that none of the bad guys are magic users. They're Judag is a warlord with a army of mutants who are trying to wake up the sleeping demon in order to have uh, Judag become a gain the powers of a wizard. He thinks it will, anyways. The reality is, it's going to eat him, or try to, anyways. Seriously, it's a monster. It doesn't think; it just eats. Yes, I know. It looks like a very, very distorted eagle with certain humanoid features. Yeah, well, it thinks like an eagle. You don't want to mess with this thing. I'll get back to it later. But yeah, Merlick, low-level magic user. Ariel is a very much a high-level magic user with a extremely diverse array of spells. Also, that does bring up one thing. Spells in Thundarr the Barbarian. Under certain circumstances, you can learn magic from another magic user. However, you need to have the innate potential to do that particular magical feat on your own. And I can only think of one time in the series where it actually became a major plot point. And that was actually, let's see here. Yes, which? Cersei. Cersei had the ability to turn people into monsters. Let's see here. Turning people into toad creatures. Well, see, there's a counter spell to that where you can turn people back to normal. See, Cersei getting petrified did not actually undo the curse she had placed on people to turn them into toad monsters. That curse, Ariel had to cast a counter spell in order to undo it. That counter spell is seemingly something Ariel learned while she was in Cersei's body. That's not explained. Just that we know Ariel was left by Cersei in Cersei's former stronghold with all of Cersei's magic books and equipment because Cersei had decided that, okay, I'm in Ariel's young, strong body. I'm going to leave the island and abandon everyone to their doom who is currently on the island and build a new home for myself somewhere else. Because what Cersei wanted more than anything else was to not be stuck on the island. Seriously, she'd been in prison for several hundred years. That was why she didn't just turn it into a kingdom or something. I don't know. Also, once in Ariel's body, she could, in theory, leave and come back at will. But I don't know. There's also the possibility that possibly the reason Cersei wanted to get away from Ariel is that undoing the body swap thing would be impossible if the range was too great, because it's shown in the episode that someone's, aura moves from place to place. And maybe possibly there's a range limit on the body swap effect. I don't know. Anyways, that's a bit of a sidetrack. Yeah, magic. Really complicated stuff. I'll do more about magic later. Let's return to watching this.
Magic section, because it's hard to describe. It's almost
pretty much anything she wants.
Yeah.
It's like whatever the situation was, that's what she did.
I do feel a minor caveat that there are situations where Ariel is like, well, I wish I could do something about this, but... So it's not like she's like an unstoppable magic user. She certainly has limits.
And the Chewbacca of the group, Ukla the Mock.
One amusing thing about Ukla is that the people who were writing this had originally intended on giving Thundarr and Ariel an animal sidekick. The people who were doing the production were like, well, it'd probably be better if it was, not an actual animal and more of a sidekick. So, Ukla.
Which is,
yes,
actually, it's my favorite character. It doesn't have a lot of lines, just growls and smashes things. I can't go wrong with that.
Oh yeah, that reminds me. The episode with Shara and Merlik. Shara and Merlik have this giant bird creature that they use as a flying mount, which fills a similar role in their team that Ukla does, except that the flying bird creature is actually an animal and not a sentient life form.
I think that with old age, I've grown to appreciate Ukla myself.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for checking out this special episode of Really Dicey. This is Manny. I'm here with Pete, and today we're going to talk about Thundarr the Barbarian. Now, Pete and I have been watching the episodes recently, and we're talking about how can we adapt this to one of our favorite role-playing systems. And I'll be honest, I was thinking about D&D 5e, but the magic system wouldn't work. Also, you may need additional source books to figure out how to add modern or even post-apocalyptic stuff into the game. It's really hard to find anything like that, and we brought up GURPS, which actually might work really well because it's so adaptable. Pete, I actually
don't know anything about playing GURPS, but I do love the idea of Thundarr, and I was actually personally trying to think of a way to make it work in the Hyperborea game.
You know GURPS better than I do. What would there be certain books you would use for GURPS specifically?
Hmm. Well, definitely. Definitely there would be a lot of home brewing, and I'm a home brewing GM. And GURPS is the home brewing system. It is the Legos of role playing game systems, is what I always tell people. Basically,
The thing he's saying about homebrewing, though, is that one thing that I noticed when scrutinizing Thundarr is that there's a lot of things where the episode is like, oh, hey, here's this thing you haven't seen before. And then they just like throw it out there with little explanation and then move on with that. Like the Beastmen trope, there's over a dozen kinds of Beastmen you see in Thundarr the Barbarian, some of which are prominently featured in a single episode and never seen again. Like the Groundlings, or those Tiger Men that were helping Judag try to wake up the sleeping demon. Never seen again. Although in that episode it's possible that there really wasn't very many Tiger Men and the sleeping demon ate most of them. Not really sure about that.
using the logic of Legos, you can take Legos to make them to play whatever you want. And that's what you can basically do with GURPS. You can basically homebrew any type of setting that you want, especially for settings that don't have a role-playing game. And Thundarr is one of those settings. There is no Thundarr, the Barbarian role-playing game.
Well, not officially. There is actually some homebrew stuff that's actually been published online already, but not an officially sponsored one. Mainly because the fact that the IP is currently being used only as a holding company sort of thing, even though the IP current holder is, I think, Warner Brothers. I think Warner Brothers is who currently owns it. Because like it was originally Ruby Spears. Ruby Spears got bought out by Hanna-Barbera. I think Hanna-Barbera is owned by Warner Brothers nowadays. Anyways, moving on.
Although I wouldn't mind seeing something like a GURPS Thundarr. So Steve Jackson, if you are watching, yeah, all right. But but let's get down to it. The way that I would put together, if I were to do like a Thundarr setting, I would start with the environment, of course. And in GURPS, I don't know about everybody else, but I always start with tech level. As far as tech level goes, I would go with a split tech level, which pretty much means that the different parts or different fields of technology, whether it be medicine or transportation, are all at different levels. And definitely in Thundarr the Barbarian, you see that. There are people riding animals. Well, yeah, you have people riding sailing ships, but also steam and oil or gas powered ships as well. You've got spaceships in Thundarr. So
When he says you have spaceships in Thundarr, we're not talking about the stalker from the stars, the lone extraterrestrial life form that came to Earth to eat humans. No. Some of the wizard war machines are actually spaceships. Mindoc. Mindoc is a great example of this. Why? Because Mindoc's fate was that his spaceship's controls were damaged and he hurtled into orbit on board the spaceship. Yeah, this big son of a gun. This is it as it's heading into orbit with the controls destroyed and Mindoc's still on board. Bye-bye. We didn't see him again, but quite frankly, given the fact that he's the person who built the freaking spaceship, I find it very believable that he could have fixed the freaking thing and come back. He never actually did, though, at least not that we ever see on screen. Then again, no one ever went back to his personal fortress to check to see if he was actually gone in a later episode, so maybe he did come back and we just didn't see him on screen. Anyways. But yeah, like the comment where you were saying about highly varied tech levels, like the tech level of Mindoc was like taking NASA technology from the late 20th century and then having a mad scientist tinker with it and expand on it for 1,000 years. Because that's who Mindok was. He was a NASA scientist alive before the Great Cataclysm, and he's still alive when Thundarr meets him over 1,000 years later. Yeah, that was a fun episode.
You got a sun sword, which is basically a lightsaber. So that's split technology. Some areas you might be lacking, and in some areas you have like the latest, or even like super science, which is basically those things that for us are mostly theoretical, that we may or may not see, things like faster than light and whatnot. And the sun sword definitely classifies as super science. So when we think super science, or at least when I think super science, the book that I always think of is GURPS Ultra Tech. Okay. And actually, in chapter 6 of GURPS Ultra Tech, which is the chapter on weaponry, what do you have but what's called the Force Sword, which is kind of like GURPS speak for lightsaber. And that right there it is. That's your sun sword. GURPS Ultra Tech even has other force weapons like force knives and stuff. The force sword appears in the basic GURPS book, so you don't need Ultra Tech. But I like Ultra Tech simply because there are all kinds of like different technology, and just like I said, there are different types of force weapons. Like a force glaive, or like I said, a force blade, which is more like a force knife. So you can have like different varieties of like sun weapon if you want to, make like a whole storyline behind that.
Personally, after comparing the Sun Sword to multiple weapons that do exist within the series, I would actually not have players use things that were actually derivatives of the Sun Sword. Why? Because we have some interesting things of power that are not the Sun Sword, and yet extremely strong. Like this weird thing. A glove, you put it on, and it gives you the ability to wield powers similar to those of a wizard, but it's the glove, not innate magic. Of course, if it's wielded by a wizard, the wizard just gets stronger. And we have this fun toy, the Power Trident. Yeah, it's just a trident with that kind of sort of glows a little bit. It eventually gets destroyed by Thundarr, but only after a long pitched battle between Thundarr and Zogar. And as you see here, that's a heck of a weapon. That was a solid brick wall before Zogar poked it with the trident. like I've said a few times, the trident or Sun Sword isn't necessarily the most useful weapon. Like, these energy rods are one of my personal favorites because of the fact that Morag and his raiders have an armory of them. Dozens of these things. Having a player pick one up and have them get it as loot, hey, you know what? Go for it. They're probably the creation of the Abyss Wizard. And that's another thing. A lot of the super science weapons are actually the creation of wizards. Because the Abyss was the former home of the Abyss Wizard. Morag and his raiders forced the Abyss Wizard to leave and stole a whole bunch of advanced tech in the process. We don't actually know how Morag and his raiders managed to force the Abyss Wizard to leave. I personally suspect that they snuck in while he wasn't there and prevented him from re-entering. But I don't know. Anyways, oh yeah, this is another one that was a personal favorite because of the fact that the Negus Sword has an energy frequency that actually has a harmful effect on the Sun Sword specifically. Yeah, the Sun Sword's internal power supply will be drained if it gets hit with the crimson energy of negative lightning, which is what powers the Negus Sword. Oh, yeah. And quite frankly, negative lightning hurts when you get hit with it. Although it apparently has a stronger effect on the Sun Sword than it does on Thundarr. Anyway, though, moving on.
That. I would also go with a GURPS biotech, which was something that I thought of.
Anyway, my main point there was actually just to feel free to make stuff up. Don't feel like you have to stick to things that were actually seen in the show.
Like, as we were getting closer and closer to making this video, like, I thought about some things and I thought, biotech would be really good also. And that would be like for things like chemical and biological enhancement, things like nanomachines and cyborgs and whatnot. Sci-tech would also be a very good book, I think, for a Thundarr setting. So there goes that.
Oh, SciTech. That's actually an interesting thing to mention because of the fact that several of the powers that you see people use in the series are things that are in other settings treated as psionic abilities. Like the fact that Cersei can use the power of scrying. Well, here's the thing. In Thundarr the Barbarian, scrying can be done by using a camera mounted on a flying drone to route a message to a TV. This is Mazim. That's not even Mazim's TV. She's using the remote on Sholo's TV to change channels and choose which image from Sholo's drone she wants to look at right now. That is a fully technological setup that it works in a way very similar to real-world security cameras. Simple stuff. But then you have magic-based scrying abilities, and multiple examples of them. This is a magic well. This is a permanent, seemingly magically enchanted artifact placed in the lair of the groundlings. Whenever Gemini wants to yell at them and tell them to do stuff, his face will appear in the magic well, and then his voice will instruct the groundlings on what he wants them to do. If the groundlings want to talk to Gemini, they can talk to the magic well and get the magic well to relay messages to Gemini. Then you have this one. This is just a puddle. Ariel, when she wanted to find where Surratt was hiding, cast a magic spell on a puddle and used the puddle to see where Surratt currently was located. Cersei and Argoth both had some sort of magic rock they carried around with them. This one's actually a green orb. This is a red gem. And they had the ability to use it to see and talk to beings that were outside their line of sight, in much the same way that the magic well worked. However, it was something portable that they carried on their person. Oh, side note on the magic well. We don't ever see the magic well in use from Gemini's point of view, only from the point of view of the groundling, so it's possible that the end, the way it worked on Gemini's end is that Gemini's literally just talking to thin air. That's a possibility. Anyways, moving on.
That right there is like all the books that I would use for tech. Definitely, like I said, ultra tech and biotech, I would definitely put at the forefront.
That's really good that GURPS has the books, because that was something I was thinking about also, because like there's so much, like you mentioned, the levels of technology in the series it's not linear, or it's just broken up. You mentioned trains. There's also one episode where one looks like medieval town was using robotic satellites to protect the town from wizards. So
He's talking about the episode where it was the Alamo. Yes, really. This series often went with real world place names. And in the Alamo episode, they had this guardian thing, which This is technology left over from pre-cataclysm. I'm not kidding. It looks like sci-fi nonsense, but it was pre-cataclysm technology. The pre-cataclysm level of tech in Thundarr the Barbarian's Earth was far greater than in real life. I mean, I mentioned the whole thing with the sleeping demon. It was created by bioengineering pre-cataclysm. And of course, the robot drones. Well, one thing that's noteworthy about this is that these are actually the ones that Sholo was using. This is actually not a episode about a specific set of robot drones, because the fact that the ones in Portal into Time look in almost exactly the same way. The only difference is the Portal into Time ones had disintegration beams that could destroy small tanks, and Sholo's drones didn't. Not a huge difference otherwise. Oh, and the Guardian computer controlled the ones in Portal into Time. The ones in Challenge of the Wizards, Sholo used methods to control them, but he didn't just, will them to do things. He actually had some sort of computerized control methodology, because as we saw in the one thing, Mazem, one of the other wizards, was able to interact with them.
It's very mixed up, and
Right.
I don't think most systems have rules for different tech like that. So it's good that GURPS have something like that. But let me ask you about this. What about magic? Now, Princess Ariel's magic is definitely a big part of the series, and
Mhm.
it's not D&D. You know, she doesn't cast fireball. She doesn't cast magic missile.
Mhm.
It's a,
Now, one thing that Manny seems to have missed here is that if you pay close attention, several of the abilities used by the various magic users in Thundarr are actually consistent with certain spells that you do see in D&D. Like Magic Missile. In D&D, like what does Magic Missile look like? Who knows? Well, several of the magic energy blasts um, do actually look kind of sort of like they could be Magic Missile. Like this energy beam that he's firing right now, no. But like there's one episode where Gemini does something which is very much like casting Hold Person on Thundarr and Ukla. He uses a spell, and you see this energy field wrap around them, and then Ukla is completely frozen in place, unable to move. Thundarr manages to not be immobilized, but that's because he had the MacGuffin of the Week on him to protect him from the magic. So, I mean, it's not like you would need to homebrew every single magical effect. Some of them could be relatively easily uh, interpolated from things that you have in the actual published spell books from either AD&D or Hyperborea. But hey, if you're making it up, you can make up as
it's a
much as you want.
different sort of thing. How would you say GURPS? How would GURPS help with that? With
Okay.
defining her magic system?
Well, here we go. With magic, I would actually do a mix of things. For standard magic, kind of like aerials, I would not use magic spells, but I would use a concept that GURPS calls magic as powers.
Oh yeah, the thing you said about standard magic, this is actually a very important distinction. One thing you notice in this article here is there's this discussion about beings with innate powers. There's a lot of them, but not all of the magic users actually have innate power. Valerie Storm was an ordinary human before she was exposed to the magic rock that gave Vashtar his powers. Vashtar, it's implied that Vashtar had no powers prior to finding the magic rock. and that all of Vashtar's powers come from the magic rock that he has. Kublai, he has a magic crown. Infernus has a magic wand. Gorn, well, I already showed you a picture of that magic glove that Gorn carries around. So all of these are beings that need something to give them their powers. And in the case of Gorn and Infernus, we don't really know what the heck they're doing. There is no backstory for the wand that Infernus uses to cast spells. Is it actually magical in the traditional sense, or is it just some really, really complicated bit of technology that looks like magic to people who don't understand it? That's actually an interesting point because of the fact that Infernus has an aesthetic that feels more like technomancer than a traditional wizard. Because he doesn't float in air with levitation. No, he rides a hover sled. Why? Seemingly all of his powers are based in tech.
Now, what is Magicus powers? Magicus powers is basically advantages having magic as their source, and this can manifest as talents or as different powers, as we see with Ariel. And as we discussed before, Ariel seems to be able to do everything and anything, but she's not necessarily casting spells when she does this stuff. It's more like these are like innate powers that she has that
I have to agree with that thing, because one thing that you will notice if you look at the pictures of all of the enemies who are wizards is that they tend to not look like normal people. Infernus looks like a normal guy, but Infernus doesn't have innate powers. Like, here's one, Crom. Merlik looks like a normal guy. Surat doesn't. Sholo wears a full bodysuit, so we literally can't tell what he looks like. Strya's not human. Strya's actually a merfolk. Cersei is an ancient, decrepit person who doesn't really look normal either. Let's see here. Ooh, Argos, a fun example. Oh, Artemis. That's the other one I was looking for. See, this guy, he has this kind of like gray skin. Other than that, he kind of sort of just looks like a normal person. Surat. Here he is with the Gauntlet of Power. Looks kind of like a rather haggard elf. Because he has pointy ears and this very, very strange sort of facial hair that doesn't really logically make sense. Not entirely sure about his skin color. Argoth. Oh, yes. That's a thing. Oh, he also has eyes in the palms of his hands. Yeah. When he fires energy beams out of the palms of his hand, it's actually an eye blast. And he can fire eye blasts out of all of these eyes. Yeah. And see through them, apparently. So he literally has eyes in the back of his head, the top of his head, the sides of his head. Yeah. This is what I was getting at, though, is that a lot of the wizards look like mutant humans, not normal humans. Yeah, seriously. Normal human, pig mutant, Artemis, who is very, very obviously blue. Oh yeah, Mazim. Mazim's another example. Wait a second. Oh yeah, that's right. I didn't put Mazim in this list because of the fact that we never actually see Mazim use her powers. Mazim, though, is also just a random person with blue skin. So the idea that wizards are actually mutants using weird mutant powers, that has a serious weight to it in this setting.
that she basically manages to call upon, and it looks like really all of the magic users pretty much use magic in this way. So that's the first thing that I would do. And you can
Okay, I would say the majority of magic users have innate powers. As I mentioned before, we do have examples we know don't. And there's some that really are unclear, like Sholo. The guy wears a full bodysuit. We don't know what he looks like without his body armor. We literally never see him. We never see his face. He could be a robot for all we know.
You can find magic as powers in GURPS Thaumatology, Chapter 7, is where like it would explain to you and give you like different concepts for using magic as powers. However, I would use spells for things like tech magic, which was another one of those things that I thought of as I was getting closer to making the video. Now, again, there's technology all over the place, but the world is broken. There's very little infrastructure. And so I like to imagine that magic or tech magic is where basically the gap is bridged, right?
Oh yeah, that reminds me of something. There are actually spells in the series um, that involve manipulating technology. Yeah, something we see Ariel do several times. I categorized it as a variation of animation because of the fact that, well, using magic to make an inanimate object move and do stuff that you want it to do. Like Gemini makes a Statue of Liberty come to life like a golem. Ariel makes this statue come to life and stuff. Well, in some other episodes, people would cast spells on decrepit pieces of machinery, like a broken car or a wrecked helicopter, and then use it as if it was brand new. They don't necessarily have the skills required to actually properly repair something like that, but while the magic spell is affecting the object, it will function normally.
So you lack the know-how, you lack the infrastructure to be able to use this technology, but here you found this magic to kind of bridge the gap, and that's and basically, like I said, you would use tech magic in that way. You would probably use that as spells, like something that basically you have to.
Oh yeah, that reminds me. The most egregious example of tech magic is actually Octagon. See, Octagon has this personal nuclear reactor thing that he uses to power his abilities. He apparently has powers even without it, but they're relatively weak. And he focuses the power of his personal nuclear reactor to summon this monstrosity to fight Thundarr and Ariel. And they can't kill it. No, seriously, they completely failed to kill the thing. The only way they could beat Octagon was by tricking the monster into smashing into the reactor. Once the reactor was disabled, the energy source keeping it in existence was gone, and thus the reactor, or the, Octagon's powers were gone, and thus the spell causing this thing to exist was gone. That's a very, very clear example of cross-contamination with tech and magic. It's not the only example. There's others, but I mean, it'll take a long time to explain every single
To
one.
go out there, you have to find, you have to learn how to do it, and in learning how to do that, you can use like this technology this very high technology that's available in the Thundarr world, and you can find tech magic in GURPS Magic Chapter 24 is where you would find that. Another thing that I would use in the technology path, there's ritual path magic in GURPS Thaumatology once again. That's in Chapter 5, and there's actually a magical path or a ritual path in thaumatology called Path of Gadgets, which again is rituals concerning technology.
Now, this is an interesting thing because there are actually some cases of ritual magic being used in Thundarr the Barbarian, because of the fact that certain of these spells that are used aren't just something where someone just like snaps their fingers and casts the spell. Especially that stupid frog curse that Cersei did on people. She really did do the... Oh, and the body swap. actually the body swap is the #1 example of ritual magic, because Cersei ties up Ariel in a contraption that's probably only meant to immobilize Ariel and keep Ariel from using her powers while the body swap was going on. But as part of that, Cersei has a few other things that she uses in order to ensure that the body swap would go smoothly. Probably because Cersei was afraid that if she screwed it up, she would die. But, you know.
So that's how I would do magic. I would do a mix of magic as powers and also spells, but I would do the spells more, like I said, for technology is how I would do it.
Interesting. Okay. If I may ask, what about the bestiary? Now, when it comes to, I guess, monsters, or anything non-human, I should say, most of the time it's mostly anthropomorphic creatures. There's a few episodes here and there that may be like an alien
Groundling.
from space. What would you use for that?
Again,
There's a rat man.
because Thundarr is like such a mix of things, you could really kind of use any bestiary. But
Yeah, like I was saying earlier, is in terms of a bestiary for Thundarr, there are certain creatures that in Thundarr the Barbarian were seen more than once. I am not going to say a lot of them, but several. Like these things. Thundarr only fights one of them in one episode, but there are several episodes where you see one of them just hanging out in the background as they're riding through a forest and stuff like that. So, you know, these are something that does exist in numbers in the world, just not necessarily everywhere. But there's also a whole bunch of other things that just pop up in one episode and are never seen again. But some of the things that pop up in one episode and are never seen again, you see a significant number of, like these giant bats that were used as mounts in Raiders of the Abyss. The Raiders, each of them had one of these bats, which means there was a breeding population of giant bats. Oh, yeah. That is something that you would have as a valid option for players to have a mount. There's also several of them that are potentially, like Dreadlun. We don't know where Dreadlun came from. It's entirely possible that Cersei's weird magic, because Cersei is one of the few characters we saw in the series that actually had biological transmutation spells. It is entirely possible that Cersei created Dreadlun. We don't know for sure, but hey. The mutant rabbit thing here, the guy who had that as a pet did not have any real magical powers. So it's just some mutant animal that he found somewhere in the wilderness and managed to control to do his will. And of course, there's several other examples. The fire whales were actually, as far as I can tell from carefully studying the episode, Mindoc was cloning them. Yeah. I don't know if those are actually a natural species or not. However, Ariel acted like she'd seen them before, and Ariel didn't seem to think that they were something that was actually Mindoc's creation, so maybe Mindoc was just cloning things so that he would have more of them. I don't know. But yeah, it's like just make up whatever weird animals you want, because the series had a massive variety of them. Like this thing. Okay, this is actually an important plot point. One of the things where it's like deep world building lore that gives you a reason to question everything you've seen in the world. What was the sleeping demon? It was a creation of pre-cataclysm super science. If pre-cataclysm super science created this monstrosity, how many of the other mutated life forms that we see in the world were the result of similar genetic research projects? We don't know, but it's a interesting bit of food for thought if you're making monsters for the setting.
What comes to my mind immediately is GURPS Dungeon Fantasy, the Monsters books, 1 and 2. And let me tell you why. Because while monsters can kind of like have some of like the standard things that you see in fantasy, like giants and stuff, there are also some like off the wall type monsters in that book that I think would be perfect. That you would these are the kind.
I mean, um, one of the wizards actually had a cyclops as one of his minions, an actual cyclops, like 20 or 30 feet tall, stomping through the jungle with one giant eye in his, yeah, all that stuff. Where did it come from? Who knows?
Kinds of monsters that I wouldn't be surprised if they came from the Thundarr Earth and somehow got into the dungeon fantasy setting, because they look like they come from the Earth of Thundarr. So that's what I would use, dungeon fantasy for your standard bestiary. And then like for anything that I guess kind of like maybe doesn't work as well, the beauty of GURPS is that you can always modify these creatures. You can use just a regular fantasy bestiary and just amp these monsters up because
Actually, you know what? I was just pondering this, and it's like, what kind of creatures would I avoid using in the Thundarr the Barbarian setting? The undead. Yeah, undead is actually something that they basically kind of sort of didn't do in Thundarr the Barbarian. The exact specifics of why and how and so on and so forth. Well, it's like I said before, it's like this isn't a setting that has eldritch gods as the um, purveyors of magical powers. It has a whole bunch of people who are weird mutants who do whatever weird mutant things that they're capable of. And they don't, as a general rule, actually have invocations of other beings. Now, there are exceptions to that, of course, channeling power from someone else to cast a spell, but it's not channeling power from deities. And with that, there's no necromancy in the traditional sense. It's like, as far as I remember, the only example of anything even remotely similar to necromancy was more akin to using telekinesis to make a body move around like a puppet. Not necromancy in the form of like, yes, I'm taking this human corpse and turning it into a zombie. Nope, doesn't have that in the setting.
because the monsters.
This is a clip from the opening scene where they talk about the way the setting works. Rumor has it that this guy is the wizard Sabian, Ariel's father. More of a rumor than anything else, though. This is a creature that he conjured by focusing magic and having the magic coalesce into the form of a monster, which is actually an ability that Ariel has demonstrated at least once, when she used her magic to create a giant cat to attack someone.
In Thundarr were like they were just out of this world and just did like all kinds of things and stuff. So you can always like tweak these things. But dungeon fantasy, if you don't want to do a whole lot of work, that's what I think.
Now, let me ask you, going back to setting a little bit. Let's talk about. We talked about the environment, but what about time? So, in a way, this is like an alternate Earth, because obviously in 1984 we survived that. There was no planet that came to our atmosphere and caused so much destruction. At least not that I know of. And you look outside.
It might have. It might have, and we just totally missed it.
Is there any other books that in GURPS that might help with that? If anyone wants to flesh out their world or their alternate Earth in some way.
Well, what I think of whenever you say time, I'm very big into GURPS Infinite Worlds. It changed the way that I do world building, let's say that. And some folks may look at Infinite Worlds and look at world building with Infinite Worlds and think that it's lazy, but I don't think it is at all. And in fact, it opened up my imagination in different ways because I very much love history. I'm a student of history. GURPS, with its leaning on reality, on real
Barbarian, uh, someone running for their life, some sort of human being with tattered clothes running around, and or a mock. That's it. And I think when it comes to
I would actually allow people to make up weird random Beastman races. Because while we do see mocks in more than one episode, it is not actually a race that is particularly common. I mean, there's that one episode where we see an entire village of mocks. That's the only time we actually see a group of mocks. The other episodes where we see mocks, there's like one or two of them that aren't Ookla. The rest of the time, the only time we see a mock is Ookla. So having players decide they want to play a groundling, hey, go for it. One of the Tigermen? Sure, why not? I mean, there's actually quite a large number of groundlings. In terms of physical size and strength, they're no match for Ookla, but they have a variety of other talents that Ookla can't match.
the classes, there's not much variation.
Uh-huh.
GURPS has the two basic books, the
Mhm.
basic campaign, the basic set characters
Mhm.
book. Is there any other book that would help out with that, in your opinion?
Well, here's the thing. GURPS doesn't really do classes. There are templates. So and while I like using templates, I don't like really trying to tell people like what templates to use. Now, races is another thing because you mentioned mocks. When it comes to races, I think the best book is Template Toolkit 2. Thundarr does not never seem to really have any set races outside of human, like you saw like different races, or I shouldn't say that it didn't have set races. It seemed like everything and anything existed. And sometimes
Yeah, that everything and anything he said there is really important, is that part of the reason why we see repetition of races so rarely is because we see new races so often. Like, the groundlings show up in one episode. You have mer people show up in one episode. You have mocks show up in one episode, and so on and so forth. Just, it's not as like we had a new race every single episode, but it was a very common thing.
you wouldn't see things again, except for the mocks. The mocks seem to have like a developed society, and it was established that Ukla was not the only mock. When I think they called it the Valley of the Mock.
Ooh, actually, that reminds me of something. And the whole like developed society thing he mentioned. One of the most amusing thing about the groundlings is that this is where they live, an underground castle. Now, one could be like, oh, well, Jim and I gave that to them. Yes, but it doesn't look like a rat hole. They're actually taking care of it and making sure it stays looking nice. Yeah, that goes a lot way with the whole like stable society sort of logic, even though these are beastmen.
Mocks that they
Yeah,
visited.
that episode. Yeah,
Again, with a setting like Thundarr, I wouldn't even have like standard, like maybe, I mean, if you're anything like me, you're gonna have things you're gonna create anyway and tell players like, hey, well, there's this thing that I made. Why don't you want to try that? I would also leave it open to the player creating their own race, because Thundarr is just that kind of a setting where it's like, yeah, you could be anything. And Template Toolkit 2, I think, could help you do that.
is there anything else you think we need for Thundarr?
What I would say is this: there are other universal game systems out there. I love GURPS. I don't like feeling like I'm preaching the gospel of GURPS. Even though I often am, but I'd be curious to know what kind of universal setting would other people use? Whether it's Savage Worlds or Basic, the Chaosium system. What universal game system would you use to run Thundarr the Barbarian in? That's what I'm curious about. I'd like to see people talk about that in the comments.
So yes, everyone, thank you for watching. Please.
Like I said, I personally like the idea of trying to make Hyperborea work as a Thundarr knockoff because of the fact that Hyperborea has stats and mechanics in the game for using technologically advanced weapons in combat. And it has a very diverse set of magical spells. So there's a wide variety of things that you can do with magic in that setting too. Exactly the same as in Thundarr? Well, I mean, the way magic was presented in Thundarr actually kind of varied a little bit from episode to episode. Like in one episode, Ariel disarms people by casting disintegration blasts and disintegrating the weapons out of their hands. She doesn't do that in most of the other episodes, though. Why? I don't know. Oh well. Gotta say, the setting is amazing fun in terms of being gonzo pop sci-fi. It is just wacky and crazy, and I love it because of that. Oh, yes, also, I'm one of those uber nerds who actually wrote a wiki about the game. I know. It's shocking, isn't it? Anyways, see you guys later.